So a color revolution is, I'll start there because that lives more on the conspiratorial realm than in the real realm.
Okay, good.
Right? Are there certain elements that go into a color revolution? And a color revolution is really the idea of an artificial revolution that's orchestrated by the government in some way. And there are multiple books out there by authors who have outlined what a color revolution, like the recipe and the process of a color revolution. The problem is that the recipe they outline is a recipe of ingredients that are always there, right? It's like saying my chocolate cake is a special chocolate cake because it uses flour, eggs, milk, and chocolate. Yeah, like that's
the level of it.
Yeah, right. But like that's essentially what a color revolution is. They say, oh, you need to have an unpopular incumbent, and you need to have a way of swaying the people, and you need to have a reason to say that the elections were rigged. Guess what? You have every time.
Right.
You
There's always that ambiguity.
You
right?
always have those ingredients. Mm-hmm. So you can't say that a color revolution is something that's orchestrated when the ingredients are always there. Instead, you have to understand there's a cultural element to it as well. And that's why you saw the Arab Spring take off. Not because somebody orchestrated it, but because culturally you had the intangibles that were at the right place and time. You had technology and a population base and a cultural motivator that brought everything to a head at the same time. So I just wanted to knock that out quickly because the idea of a color revolution, while color revolutions happen, the idea that they are orchestrated by a central government is silly. They can be exacerbated by a government, right? Because somebody can always fund that defunct, tangential, marginal cause. And somebody can always throw them an extra $10 million and make them all of a sudden more relevant. But it's very hard for a government entity to create something out of nothing, to create this cause out of nowhere. It's easier to just go in and fund an existing cause, take a marginalized voice and fund it and make it louder. And that's what is really a traditional covert influence campaign. That's been used since the days of the ancient Egyptians, right? That's real. Color revolution is commercialized.
Okay.
Now that compared to
False flag.
a false flag operations are very real. They are strategically, doctrinally trained to intelligence officers and military officers. And a false flag operation is when you claim to be someone you aren't while executing an operation. So if I walk up to somebody who's a weapons smuggler from Syria and I claim to be Canadian and I treat them and promise them all these benefits that they'll get in Canada, and I promise them Canadian money and maple syrup, that's a false flag. I am not Canadian. They don't know that I'm not Canadian. They're cooperating with me, fully thinking they're cooperating with the Canadian representative. And then when the time comes that I get what I want, I fall away, I disappear from space. They go to the Canadian government and say, hey, what about our payment? And the Canadians are like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's a false flag. There are certain countries that execute false flag more effectively than others. And there are certain countries that use it more often than others. Tops of that list, the Israelis use false flags.
Really? I was going to ask you about that because it seems to me that they could use it more, right, than they do. For example, I've heard, my friends from that are Lebanese, they're Christian friends, and they hate Hamas and Hezbollah as much as the Jews in Israel do, but they are competing against, a population that's providing schools, and Hezbollah does a lot of social services, as does Hamas has a non-military wing too. So don't you think they could be much more effective? And how do you react to October 7th in the light of them being at the first country that you listed?
Yeah, absolutely. So Israel and Mossad use false flags often and effectively, but the problem is they most often replicate Western partners. So they false flag as Americans. They false flag as Canadians. They false flag as British. Well, what happens when you're in the Middle East? Nobody trusts Americans, Canadians, or the British.
Right.
So you have to false flag as somebody else. So that's where it's hard. It's hard for Israelis to false flag as any Arab country because you have to speak Arabic, you have to understand the Quran. It's difficult, right? Inside the Middle East, you've got the Saudis and the Emiratis who are exceptional at false flagging as other Arab countries, false flagging as Pakistani or Omani or Bahraini or, the list goes on, or each other, right? So very effective process there for false flagging. So could Israel use it more? Yes, except that they're so accustomed now. It's been 15 or 20 years of dominance by the West. They've perfected the art of mimicking the West, not mimicking Europe or someone else.
Freedom! So fresh, son. Freedom!